Welcome everybody. Let it kick off on recording. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Today's session, coming from both Thai Houston and Thai Angels of Texas, is what we thought a very, very relevant topic to talk about how to hire great talent that sticks. But before we do that, just a quick little blurb about Thai for those of us who are joining us who may wonder, who is Thai as an organization. So Thai is the Indus Entrepreneurs, and we're a nonprofit professional organization, and it was founded in 1992 in Silicon Valley by a group of successful entrepreneurs, corporate executives, and senior professionals. So, our fundamental mission globally across Thai is about fostering entrepreneurship, creating that new generation of entrepreneurs, either through mentoring, networking, education. We've got many new thematics like Thai University, working with university, even young entrepreneurs as young as high school, as well as women as well, and other diverse communities. So currently, globally, we have about 15,000 members, and we have a little over 3,000 charter members and mentors in 61 countries across 14 countries. So we are the largest entrepreneur network around the world. So we're running into a little bit of difficulty. Before I introduce Yael, I do want to give some credit. So hopefully we can get Mark Hamzat up on screen here shortly, because this is about, it always takes a community, and it takes a connected community. And I've known Mark for a number of years, and he's such a great connector. And he gave me a call, and we were talking about people issues, and he's like, oh, I've got someone who'd be great to talk about some of the human capital issues a lot of us are talking about. So a bit about Mark. Even though he doesn't like to talk too much about himself, he actually has a Bachelor of Science in Physics. He is the SPE, which is Society of Professional Engineers Chair for Finance and Investments for the Gulf Coast here in the Houston region. He is a member of the FENG, the Financial Executives Networking Group. He's on the Forbes Business Council. He's on the AAPG Advisory Board for UPitch, which involves entrepreneurs. And he's on many, many more things. So we're glad to have Mark here, and then I will let him introduce his guest, Yael, and then we can kick off the discussion. Over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, and also humble thanks to Thai. We appreciate you for allowing us to work with your network and add value to your members. So a little bit about, and I'll let Yael introduce herself, but Yael and I met when I think when I first came to Houston a number of years ago, won't say how many, and we worked together at RHI, Robert Half International. And out of everyone that I worked with, I was really touched when she came back from, I believe it was Israel. I hadn't met her before, and she was just this bubble of energy, and she brought everyone chocolates. And for some strange reason, that really stuck with me. And I really enjoy building relationships with people, as Amy knows. And Yael and I recently reconnected at a networking event, and she reached out to me to, for some speaking engagements. And, I know how, genuine she is, how she cares about people. And so I reached out to the FENG, but then also Amy at Thai, to have Yael give you guys some great resources, some great information. So without further ado, always wanted to say that. I've never said that before. Let's introduce Yael, if again.
Thank you. Can I share my screen?
You can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. All right, super. Can everybody see it? Yes, okay. Well, I heard nothing, so I'm going to assume.
I think just give it a few minutes. It says it started screen sharing, but it might take a minute or two to show up on the screen.
Great.
Give me a sec. I'm glad this doesn't only happen to me. Yeah, I'm glad there's someone else to join in my technology pains.
It keeps us on our toes, right?
I'm wondering if we just kind of unshare and then reshare again. I don't know. Maybe that might help as we.
Okay, pull it down and then start over.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was on pause, so maybe just unpause it, remember?
No, because I stopped, but here, we'll just give it another shot. Yeah, okay.
We still can't see it.
I don't know. Hang on, I'm so sorry. Let me stop it. Let me just reboot PowerPoint.
Just hold on one second, everyone. And we'll
Yes,
get you there.
we did a test before we started to make sure it worked.
Yeah. Do you have two screens up?
I do.
Okay. So you need to make sure, I guess, they mirror one another. With a group like Ty, you're going to get people coming in and giving us some good technology. Yeah, if you have two screens, it might need to mirror the displays. Now that's happened to me before. It depends on how you're viewing your screen.
Okay. Hang on. I rebooted it. Let's see if it'll work. Is it doing it? Is it booting?
No. Maybe if you just undo, do you need the two screens and just quickly just undo and just do it from your laptop? It should work. Yeah? If you can swing it that way.
Or you can maybe email the PowerPoint to one of us and we can share it.
We'll pull it up for you. Yeah.
That sounds great.
So kind of as we're waiting for this, I mean, one of the reasons, and then Mark, you can join me as well, is, you know, not from my unique ventures role and Ty role, you know, we've had a lot of these conversations about people, right? You know, we work with energy companies. It's been the question of, you know, do we bring back people back into the office? Do they want to come back into the office? You know, re-looking at the different ways of working, right? It's been hard on, I would say, in myself working with small business owners, right? There's been a huge human capital shortage, and trying to find really good talent has been very, very difficult. And, you know, companies are trying to relook at, you know, how do we create that value proposition, right? And find these people in the current market, right, where it is a shortage and people have so many choices. And when you're a small business and small company, you don't have a lot of options there too as well. So let's see if this kind of picks up here. But then, you know, Mark, you're involved in a lot of boards and a lot of, you know, both on a capital side, investment side, and professional organizations. You know, while Yale's pulling that up, you know, what are some of the things that you're hearing on that side of the world?
Amy, thank you. It's a good question. And in the energy industry, a lot of folks, obviously we know what happened to the price of oil last year. It went down. and now it's back up. So a lot of folks did leave the industry and are now looking for new places to plug themselves into. And myself and Amy are, we both sit on both sides of energy, so traditional and energy transition. And what I'm seeing is that there's a slight disconnect between folks that are in the traditional energy space and in the energy transition space. And so the talent from the traditional energy space is exactly what I believe, anyways, that the energy transition space needs. And so there needs to just be more communication, which it is actually beginning to happen with different organizations kind of joining together and combining traditional versus non-traditional or energy transition. So that's a lot of what I'm seeing, and it looks like Gail has her PowerPoint ready.
Perfect. So now y'all can fill it out, everything in between for us. Okay, off to you, Yael. Thanks.
Thank you, Samia, for coming to the rescue. You can advance to the next slide. Just a little bit about me. So I own a little company called Infinite Talent Partners. We are a boutique recruiting and career coaching firm. So we help small and medium-sized businesses find talent that they otherwise can't find on their own. Which in our current landscape is actually a lot. And then we also help candidates put their best foot forward and guide them through the transition process, whether that means writing resumes or coaching on interviewing or negotiating salaries, any number of things. I've been in the business for close to 17 years. I started out with Hamzat. Or Mark, I know him as Hamzat. I started a little bit before him, working for a big recruiting agency. And then I went in-house and spent the second half of my career in-house before I decided to start my firm. So I've been in this business for a long time and have helped companies of all sizes all over the country find talent, and I'm delighted to help you guys understand what the landscape looks like today and some best practices that I have cultivated throughout the years to help companies really figure out how to capture some great talent that will ultimately stay. So if you could advance, please. So first, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what's happening in the market right now. If you haven't heard the term, the Great Resignation, all you need to do is Google it and you'll see a whole slew of information. I've read a number of reports. PwC just put a report out in the last couple of weeks. They estimate that 65% of all US workers are said to be actively or passively looking for work. People have felt trapped in their jobs for the last 18 months through the pandemic, and now they are ready to go for a number of reasons. So absolutely, a lot of people feel burned out. I think it's interesting. Companies resisted letting people work from home for so many years because they didn't think that they would work as hard and people couldn't be accountable. And now people are burned out because they're working so much harder while working from home because there are no boundaries than they ever did working from the office. So before there was a hard stop when people walked out the door at 5 or 6 o'clock, and now there is no hard stop. And so people are feeling it. Also, poor leadership, poor work environments really stick out when people are in this microcosm of the last 18 months. And so those things are coming to light. People also really want to continue working from home or some kind of hybrid work arrangement. Also, they are being extra critical about opportunities for growth, especially as so many companies are hiring. So they feel like grass might be greener and they're going to go kick some tires and see what happens. So next slide, please. As I have seen a lot of placements go sideways, a lot of what we're seeing is a desire for more, and that's the reason people are turning down opportunities and or continuing to explore. So first, I think it's important to know, and I tell all of my clients this who are wanting to hire hourly employees, Amazon pays $15 an hour. And so that really is your competition. And so it's important to consider, you know, what that looks like and who you're potentially competing with. People also want flexible work arrangements and they want incentives to leave current roles. I've seen some absolutely asinine pay increases come through in offers that are even being turned down. And so the very best people are going to require some pretty aggressive negotiating. Unemployment also, if you haven't heard, the latest numbers just published last week. Unemployment in the US is down to 4.8%. In September, it was 5.2%. In August, I'm sorry, it was 5.2% in August. Pre-pandemic, it was close to 4%. And while it still looks like unemployment is high, most of that incremental unemployment is in the hospitality sector. So in the professional, non-farm is the category, it's extremely low, down in the 3s. So to give you an idea, I've been tracking job growth for years. Report comes out monthly, and over the last kind of 5 years pre-pandemic, we were said to be in a very steady growth, some pretty steady growth in the job sector. And what I generally saw was 150 to 200,000 jobs created every month. And so these are the numbers for the last 5 months. September actually expected 700,000, only 194,000 jobs were created, but August 235, July 943, which is absolutely crazy. June, 850,000 jobs, May, 559,000 jobs. So really and truly some phenomenal job growth, which tells you what you ultimately are competing with. Next slide, please. So, you know, some things to think about. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about planning for a new hire, which really and truly is the foundation of any good hire. You want to make sure that you think through a lot of things. Even if it's a replacement, you should be asking yourself some of these questions before you actually start to interview, before you start to look at resumes. Really important to have a look at what your current landscape is, so that you can be successful. Next slide, please. So what do we need to think through? So I think the most obvious thing, you know, what are all the responsibilities this person will be expected to deliver on? Most of those things are captured in a job description. That's where you'll inventory all of the things that you are hoping to be able to all the things that you're hoping a potential candidate will be able to bring to your organization. You need to think about, are there tools in place right? So, if you were to hire somebody and you want them to do inventory, for example, do you have a system designed to make sure that they can be successful in those things? Are any responsibilities being reallocated? So if you are going to, if a new job was created because somebody is working too hard, does that person know that you're going to pull some things off of their plate? And have you had that conversation with them? Who needs to be involved in that process? Both the process of reallocating any responsibility, but also within the interview process and or the selection process. What soft skills are needed? That's really important. And I can tell you as a recruiter, I'll tell you that soft skills are probably the most important things to find. You can teach somebody, how to book a journal entry, but can you teach somebody a great attitude? Can you teach somebody initiative? Can you teach somebody curiosity? Those things are truly important and ultimately what will make a great hire. And I think it's important to inventory those things so you know what you're looking for. What's your budget for salary and what can you get for that money? So sometimes people will come to me and say, listen, I want all of these things, but my budget is $40,000. And I might say to you, well, the market for that skill set is $80,000. So we have a huge discrepancy. Where can we modify some of your expectations? Does your salary match what you can get in the marketplace? You can either learn that the easy way by listening and doing some research, or you can learn that the hard way. The market is what the market is. And people, especially now when everybody's out looking, are going to be really keeping an eye on this. Things will absolutely level themselves out. Next slide. So you've done all your pre-planning and now you're ready to start moving forward, right? So you're going to gather resumes, and that might be through a posting that you put up. You might ask for referrals. Telling all of your friends and family, I think actually is a wonderful tool. People know really great people. And so that's always a great tool. Reaching out to networking groups, reaching out, for example, through TIE, to see who potentially might be available or might be interest that has some kind of common network. Or of course, calling your friendly recruiter if it's a skill set that's really tough to find, right? Where are you going to identify some of those candidates so that you can have visibility for them? Next slide. So one thing that I do just want to say, just in case, Mark, I would love it if somebody has a question while I'm going through these, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat. And then Mark, please interrupt me. Like, I'm more than happy to answer questions in real time. But we also, I left some time at the very end for questions if anybody has them.
Okay, perfect.
Yep. So while you're looking at resumes, probably some of my best advice to hiring managers is don't overthink a resume. So only resume writers are professional resume writers. Sometimes candidates will engage with a professional resume writer, but sometimes they won't. And so I would really caution people to not overthink what they're seeing on paper and to be open-minded about what you're looking at. The purpose of a resume, of course, is to generate interest, not to land a job. Amy, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm going to interject, right? Yeah.
Please.
So to the audience, if they're out there seeking employment, do you think it's worth the money for hiring a professional resume writer, and kind of what would your advice be to people?
Yeah. So
if they're considering that.
Yeah. So as a professional resume writer, I'll tell you yes and no.
Yeah.
So actually recently wrote a blog about this. Your resume, in order to get visibility, needs to have scope, context, and commonality, right? Your readers should really understand what you did, at what level, i.e., if you're a project manager managing a $50,000 project versus a project manager who's managing a $2 billion project, those are not the same skill sets, right? And so the person reading the resume should really make sure that they capture those things. If they haven't, or they don't know how to put that on paper, or they don't know how to identify those things, then they absolutely need a resume writer. If they can capture those things on their own and make them succinct and organized, then they're on their own. There are so many tools and resources available. The last thing, Mark, was commonality. I see you trying to remember what they are. So if people can capture all of those things on their own, then absolutely go for the gold. If you can't, then I think that a resume writer is a really good investment. Great question. Thank you. So as a hiring manager, when you're looking at resumes, I really would encourage you to focus on the things that are actually important in this actual job. So it's okay to prioritize things like attention to detail. Like, I have seen people nix candidates because they had a typo on their resume. And sometimes I ask myself, and I ask hiring managers, like, is it that important? Like, how large a sin is this in the big scheme of things? And how important is it as you're looking at this candidate? So, I would tell you that it's just a tool. It is not an exhaustive representation of who a candidate is or what they bring to the table, and to be really open-minded about resumes. Next slide, please. So you're ready to interview, and I love this little comic. Why should we hire you? Because you have a job opening. While that's meant to poke fun at the candidates, it also is sometimes true of companies and hiring managers who will hire without giving any thought to the role or what that looks like. And so this is just a fun thing. So next slide. As we're thinking about interviews, so some common mistakes, and asking leading questions is by far the largest mistake that I see a lot of hiring managers make through the interview process. And let me tell you what that actually looks like, right? So first of all, a leading question is obviously telling them the answer before you ask the question. So for example, somebody might say, teamwork is really important here. We like to make sure that people are cross-trained so that we can work interchangeably. So tell me, do you prefer working on a team, or do you prefer to work independently? So that's a leading question. You've just given them the answer, and then you're asking them the question. And so my second bullet point, talking too much, that's a prime example. No question needs a prelude. So there's no need to give anybody any background or context before you ask them questions. Really try to focus on making sure that you are gathering as much information as you can about the candidates before you tell them anything. So to that end, I always like to make sure that my hiring managers set an agenda when they start the interview. So that might look like, thank you so much for coming in. We're excited to talk to you. We want to take as much time as we can to really get to know you. So we're going to jump right in and ask some questions, and we promise to leave time at the end for your questions, and we'll tell you all about the role and the company. And then you start asking questions. Tell me about a time, XYZ. So they don't need to know anything else until after you've gathered information. A common mistake that people make is, they get so nervous, even hiring managers, they get so nervous going through interviews that they feel like they need to tell candidates everything before they start talking about the role. And that's a mistake, because you literally have just given them all of the answers. You've told them all of your priorities. You've told them why the role was open, which inevitably will lead to some telling information about the organization or the role or the scope and so forth. So leave your talking to the very end.
How does hiring managers overcome those nerves? I mean, you're very confident, so how do you overcome those nerves?
Yeah, so I like to always have some icebreakers ready, right? So, and I think on my next slide, but don't advance yet, but on my next slide, I say, talking about things like traffic or weather are really appropriate icebreakers for everybody, right? Like, oh, did it take you very long to get here? How was your commute? Which, by the way, is really great, because then you can find out if somebody lives really far away, which could potentially be a problem long term. Or, oh my gosh, it's so humid outside, it's killing me. How about you? Just talk to the person as a human being about something not at all related to the job. So just kind of getting to know them so that the conversation can flow a little bit more easily. And then again, right into the agenda, nothing about the job until the very end.
Can you quickly explain that last point? Only seeing what you want to see. How does that play out in a hiring situation?
So sometimes, and I think this is very common human nature, I always tell my clients, interviewing and job searching is exactly like dating, right? So people put on their best face when they come into an interview. And so you start to get an emotional attachment to the candidate, right? You're like, oh, I really like them. Like, I would like to have a beer or coffee with them in a non-romantic way. I like this person. And so then sometimes you compromise on the things that you're looking for, right? So you really like this person, but let's say you have determined that organizational skills are the most important attribute that you're looking for, and the candidate revealed that they're not super organized, right? But you really like them. And so maybe you're going to push forward anyway. And so that's an example of seeing what you want to see, allowing yourself to, and your judgment to be muddied because you have developed an affinity for the candidate. So I'll say it's important to keep your eyes open. And then asking close-end questions, I don't recommend at all. It's a common mistake. So tell me about a time. How do you feel about? Why did that happen? How do you typically, etc. So you really want to make sure that you're asking open-ended questions and that you're generating some really good feedback. Next slide, please. Great question, Mark. Thank you. Oh, yes. So start with an icebreaker, set an agenda, determine what traits, skills, and experience you want to uncover and explore. And I'll tell you, I really like when my hiring managers inventory a lot of these skills. Like on paper, right? Oh, organizational skills, really important. Communication skills, really important. Corporate presence, Excel, whatever those things are, and then generate questions to support them. Some of my less experienced hiring managers, I'll create an interview guide for them. And an interview guide are suggested questions. If you get stuck and you can't think of anything to ask, but you haven't explored some of these topics, you can go to the interview guide in order to generate them. And I'll tell you, if you decide that organizational skills are important and you can't think of a question to be able to gather that data, Google is your best friend. You can Google interview questions, organizational skills, and see which of those feels right to you so that you're prepared in an interview. Yeah, and craft the questions. Next slide, please. Yeah, so coming prepared with open-ended questions. So how do you do X, Y, and Z? How did that go? Also, what does that mean to you? So I would tell you to be cautious of language that is subjective, right? So for example, a lot of people will say, oh, I want to leave this job because there's no growth. You might ask yourself, you might ask the candidate, what does that mean for you exactly? I'm always hesitant when candidates will working for a Fortune 50 company and they say there's no opportunity for growth. And I'll say, well, how is that possible? There are 100,000 employees at that company. Let's talk about that. What does growth actually mean to you? So when they use subjective words, make sure that you really explore them so that you really can gather the right information.
Question, Miriam. I mean, and this is even from an energy standpoint, right? Just because the talent pipeline, and I mean, this really applies to everyone across the board because you have a different generation, you had the Gen X, but now we haven't really talked a lot about the Gen Z. They have, everyone's kind of looks at this no longer lifetime employment. People have got different drivers, right? And what they are looking for in terms of employment, maybe not necessarily even permanent employment. So how is them as an employer, do you ask some of these questions, knowing, the way, a Gen Z would be looking for a job, right? And that would really kind of enable you to kind of understand really what kind of work environment are they looking for at the end of the day.
Yeah, so that is an excellent question. So in the recruiting world, we call that currency. So identifying a candidate's currency, what's important to you, right? Like, what are the things that you're looking for that are going to dictate whether you stay? So my all-time favorite question to ask, you can write this down, it's on one of the next slides as well. My all-time favorite question to ask is, what are you looking for at this point in your career, right? What's important to you? I would just ask the question, right? And they might say, listen, the pandemic taught me that the most important thing to me is to be in a healthy work environment with a manager that is supportive of my career goals and my family situation. Fantastic, right? Like, now you know what that looks like. And then as a hiring manager, I would challenge yourself to ask, like, okay, how flexible are we in reality? What does that look like? Are we supportive of people's families? Can we actually deliver on what they're looking for, so that you can make a match, right? If you ask people pointedly, I'll tell you, they will tell you what is important to them. And then, as to point back to my previous slide, really hear them. So if they tell you, what's really important to me is to be in a company that is supportive of my family situation. I have a 6-year-old, and if he gets sick, I'm going to need to leave work. What does that mean for you as an employer? Can you be supportive of that, or will that just pose problems for you, right? Be realistic about what that looks like, so that you can ultimately make a match. That's
a question. Some employers in some industries like to do interviews outside the office. So they'll ask you to lunch, they'll maybe ask you for drinks. How do you, from both sides, as a interviewee and as an interviewer, how do you approach those, and what do you recommend, is a good fit between, or what do you recommend is the difference between like interviewing in the office and like maybe going for coffee or drinks or lunch, et cetera, et cetera?
So it's a test, right? I mean, point blank, and both sides should be aware that it is a test. I actually had a candidate, a CFO level candidate, nixed from consideration for a role because he did not eat the appetizer that the CEO ordered for the table. So
What?
it happens. And so it's a test. And so to that, I'll say, people use those interview approaches for a number of reasons. If culture is extremely important and you want to make sure that somebody fits in, then an offsite interview can be very appropriate because, you interject all of these additional variables that don't exist in an office, right? In an office, there are no waiters coming around to interrupt you. In an office, there are no screaming babies at the table behind you. In an office, there isn't soup to be ordered and slurped or spilled on your tie or whatever, right? So there are all these additional variables that people want to explore. But I'll tell you again, because interviewing and job searching is just like dating, it's an opportunity to see if you actually like this human being. And I'll tell you, I absolutely tell hiring managers it is an appropriate litmus test to see if you actually want to get to know this person as a human being, right? If somebody is interesting and you have a lot in common, that's a great preface for a working relationship. It shouldn't be a determining factor, but it's okay for it to be part of the process. And a lot of those kinds of traits you can gather in an offsite interview. And so if you feel like the person that you got in your interview room was really nervous, you just didn't feel like it was a good representation, it's absolutely appropriate to take it offsite and see what happens. Great question. Okay, and then read between the lines. What is not said is just as important as what is said. So as a career coach, I tell candidates to give the most real estate on their resume or airtime in an interview to those skills that they want to utilize again. And so please keep in mind that subconsciously those things happen as well. So let's say hypothetically you are interviewing a project manager, and when you ask them about that job, a lot of the traits that they tell you about or responsibilities that they had were administrative in nature. You can either continue to dig to see if they really had an opportunity to do more of the strategic leadership, influence, organization, or you can hear what they actually said, which is that most of their responsibilities were administrative in nature, and help you to understand what the mix was of their responsibilities. So just because, for example, somebody said their job title was project manager, really explore so that you are hearing what they actually did rather than making assumptions.
Oh, I'm so excited. I have to jump in on your last line, like what is not said. Is just as important, and it's not. I'll just speak from my perspective, because I work with entrepreneurs, and this is not even hiring. When we play such an important, like what companies are we going to work with, right? And it's a very close. It's like a marriage, right? It's a long-term relationship.
Yes.
So a lot of the engineers on the very, very, process. But, from the commercial side, which is the lens that I look at, I really focus because it's 60 to 70% that person, right? I really hone in on what is it that they didn't say that maybe I would have expected them to say, and what was the reason for that. Not that it's a bad thing. Sometimes it could be a good thing, right? So it really gives me insight into how the person thinks, right? What are their drivers? Doesn't mean they necessarily have to say it, right? So I think that's one thing that a lot of people kind of overlook. They always focus on that the written. They'll write down everything that that person is saying, right? Where I'm really focusing on the body language and, you know, maybe word choices I would have expected them to use, and they didn't, right?
That's
It gives me
right.
a lot of insight.
That's right. And sometimes you can continue to explore that, right? And to see, you know, perhaps they neglected to say it because it did not occur to them, but yes, of course it is. And then you explore that for validity, right? Like, oh, you know, I expected you to talk more about having to influence a cross-functional team. Did you have an opportunity to do that? And they might say, oh my gosh, yes, of course. Like I had a team of 50 reporting to me. They were all different groups and different things. And this is how I mobilized them. Right. And so now there's validity to what they're saying. And perhaps they didn't go there because they forgot, or the question didn't lend itself to that, et cetera. And so it's okay to explore, but hear what they're saying and use your spidey senses. You know, do you feel like there is substance to what they're talking about? 100%. Next question, next slide, please. Okay, yeah, try to uncover the candidate's motivation or currency, as we call it. In addition, what are you looking for at this point in your career? What's the most important thing you're hoping to find? Sometimes I like to ask, you know, what is the kind of number one or number two thing that you're hoping to find? Why are you thinking about leaving your job? And again, like I would always raise an eyebrow with that one, right? Like, oh, I'm looking for growth. Okay, tell me about that. Have you not had an opportunity for growth? What does that look like at your company? Is that systemic or is that you? You know, what does that ultimately look like? And then why did you leave your past jobs? You know, what was your motivation in a previous job? Oh, at this point in my life, I really was looking for more money and this was a great opportunity. Or, you know, I had just started a family and I needed the flexibility, but now the kids are all in school and I don't need that much flexibility anymore, et cetera. So really trying to uncover what their motivations are, so that you can have an honest dialogue with yourself about whether or not you can meet their expectations. Next slide. Candidate selection. So checking references, I'm actually a huge supporter of checking references. Some people come to me and say, oh, references are worthless because they only give you people that will say nice things about them. I'll tell you, that's not always true. People are not as smart as you think they are. And also, if you are being really strategic about your references, you also can read between the lines. So I have a list of questions that I always ask. And one of my questions is never, so tell me about Joe. I don't want to hear like an open dialogue. I have very specific questions. What did they do for you? How did they do? How was their ultimate job performance? How's their work ethic? How's their communication? How's their accuracy of their work? How do they get along with everybody at the office? Would you hire them again? And I'll tell you, when somebody really believes in the candidate, it shows, and that's worth something. And when somebody doesn't really know, or is vague, or it's a very short reference, that's saying something as well, and you should hear them. But ultimately, it's okay to determine whether or not that person was in a position to give the kind of reference that you hope for. Rolling out and negotiating offers, it's just like dating. Everybody wants to feel really good at the offer stage, right? So it's super important to roll out an offer that you are excited about. I always recommend rolling out an offer verbally before you send it in writing so that you can hear their enthusiasm or sometimes, unfortunately, lack thereof, and so that you can really explore some of those things in real time, right? If somebody says, oh my God, I'm so excited, this is wonderful, thank you so much, let me talk to my family and I'll give you guys an answer later. Fantastic. Or if somebody's like, oh, okay, well, thank you, and I'll get back to you. You should explore that as well. And so really talking to the candidate and making sure you like to have an idea what they're looking for before you roll out an offer, so that all expectations are aligned. And honestly, the best way to do that, not to toot my own horn, but is through a recruiter who can gather all that information for you up front so that there's no surprises. Do you have a question, Mark?
Yeah, how do you encourage, let's close out the question, the candidates to negotiate? And if they don't, do you think it's a good or a bad idea? And how do you encourage candidates to negotiate? And is there a difference between like men and women with regards to negotiating as well? Several questions, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So first, I'll answer your last question first. Yes, there's absolutely a difference between men and women. So the negotiating stage happens way before an offer is rolled out, right? So at some point in the interview process, hopefully you have had some kind of conversation with the candidate about money. Either, what are you at now and what are you hoping for? Which is, it is legal in the state of Texas. There are more and more states across the country that are no longer allowing the question, what are you making now? And it's okay to just ask, what are you hoping for in your next role, right? So let's say hypothetically, you budgeted $100,000 for this role. In your first interview, you find out the candidate's looking for 120. Now, if you can potentially get to 120 or close to 120, then it's okay to continue forward. If you absolutely in no universe can get to $120,000, then it's time to have a very real conversation with the candidate. And I would have it right then and there to be respectful of everybody's time. You might say, listen, I think that your expectations are realistic, but I'm afraid our budget for this role is only $100,000. The role is eligible for bonus up to 20%, which means I do think we can get you to your $120,000 goal, but it would be in total compensation rather than base salary. Is that something that you would consider? And then listen to what they have to say. They might say, oh my gosh, well, I'm already at 118 as a base salary. So I don't know that I could take a step back and then put the kibosh on it, right? Like you should be having those conversations from the get-go, so that you have an understanding of what candidates ultimately are looking for way before you get to the offer stage. Because if they have spent time with 4 hiring managers and a CEO and your general counsel, and then you offer them $20,000 less than they're making, nobody is going to be happy. So better to have those conversations sooner rather than later. Mark, in reference to one of your questions, I find that men ask for more money at those early stages than at the late stages. So I really prefer to talk to candidates about money and really understand exactly what they want before the offer stage. So if they came back and they said, listen, I'm looking for 120 to 125, I prefer to just offer them what I can in their budget rather than lowballing and expecting them to come back. So I believe that the employment relationship starts sooner rather than later. And if people think that you're playing games, I don't know that that's a great way to start a relationship. So I prefer to really know what somebody is looking for, and then if I can, give them what they've asked for. Okay, next slide. So onboarding, prepare for your new hire. I have seen too many hiring managers take a lot of time, a lot of thoughtful consideration in selecting candidates. And then they get all the way to the first day and they did drop the ball. So really important, get a desk and their assets set up. Really important that they feel like you're ready for them. Take time out of your day to introduce your new hire to everyone they should know. Arrange meetings with important stakeholders for their first day. Gather the materials and documents they will need, give them access to certain folders on the drive. New employee swag kits. So this is actually a big trend in recruiting, which is to give employees swag, which stands for stuff we all get, all of the cups and hats and pens with your logo on it, and take your new hire to lunch. Those first few days really are critical in setting the tone for the corporate culture and what their long-term employment is going to look like. And I blasted right through that one because I see that we're running out of time. Next slide, please, which I think is just for, questions. So does anybody have any direct questions about anything they saw that I can answer if we have time for that, Samia?
Oh yeah, we'll make time since we had to start a bit late here. So let's get people asking questions if they have any. I mean, Mark and I have been asking all along, so we'd like to open it up. So if anyone who is listening now would like to ask questions, we'll ask them to start keying them in. Do we have one? Do you have a question? I'll just throw one out there, okay? If I'm an employer, right, and I'm kind of struggling in this market to find, to fill a position, well, maybe many, and I just can't find, and I can't find that compromise. What is your advice to employers? Do I just kind of go ahead and kind of suck it up and hire someone that I know is not going to be a long-term fit? Or do I try to hold out and see, kind of suffer the organizational consequences of kind of being short-staffed? What are your advice to those employers that are running into these situations, or besides trying to have areas where I can compromise?
So my first advice would be to look inside. Right? Why have you not been able to find any candidates? Like, are there really no candidates available in the marketplace? So for example, if you are in rural Wyoming and you're looking for an aerospace engineer, there really are no candidates in the market, right? But if you are in Houston and you are looking for an accountant and you can't find one, you need to go inside, ask yourself the question, am I being too demanding? Right? Have I missed out on some good talent because I wanted X, Y, and Z and I did not see them on paper, right? Like, are there ways that I have contributed to this lack of talent to be able to find? And I'll tell you, I focus there because I absolutely wholeheartedly believe that there is talent available out there. Most people, especially when they come to a recruiter, want somebody who is currently doing the exact role that they need done. And because they have neither the time nor the resources to train. And to that, recruiters all get together. And what we say is, you can either have the role vacant and you continue to do two people's jobs, or you suck it up for a period of time and train somebody that needs to be brought up to speed, right? So there's always a trade-off, while it's delightful to think you can hire somebody that can hit the ground running, sometimes that's just not the case, or your organization is not appealing to those people, right? Like, you know, for example, it's really hard for somebody to hire somebody out of a really big company and take them to a small company if there isn't some really spectacular value proposition, right? So, you know, to take somebody from Fortune 500 benefits, flexibility, resources, tools, into a small company where there's going to be no work flexibility, no additional vacation time, no opportunities for growth, and we're going to work you around the clock. Like, what's that value proposition, right? So really figuring out what you bring to the table and how you can move the needle for a candidate so that they actually want to come to your organization.
I think you want to read we'll do one question here, you know, and we'll kind of, you know, close everything out. Mark, you want to read the question we have from Chris Bean?
Chris Bean. Yes, excellent. It was a great answer, Yael. So Chris asks, considering the primary hiring platforms such as LinkedIn, Indeed, et cetera, is there one that really stands out and works better, and why?
Yeah, so it depends on what you're hiring for. So in my experience, professionals are on LinkedIn, and trade, technical, and individual contributor, kind of junior level candidates are more on Indeed and the other platforms. So really and truly the higher level strategic professional folks are on LinkedIn. And so you need to be wherever your audience is. So sometimes I also like Glassdoor sometimes, ZipRecruiter I'm not a fan of, but it really just depends what you're hiring for.
I have not had luck. I will tell you, I'll be a testimony. I have not had luck when I had to hire people using ZipRecruiter.
Yeah, me neither.
Quick addendum to the question. What about sites like Guru, Fiverr, and Upwork?
I don't know. I mean, like, for example, I know Fiverr to be a platform for people that are looking to participate in the gig economy.
Okay.
Right. So people who want to have multiple jobs and or gigs and not necessarily work full time for an employer, those are great platforms for that.
Okay.
But if you're looking for a permanent hire or a full-time hire, or better said, a dedicated hire, those are not the platforms for those kinds of functions.
Okay.
There's more of a trend. There is more of a trend on Upwork, though, I will say, Mark, you know, you're getting more, this is me as a CPA, you're getting more accountants, you're getting more attorneys, you're getting more professionals, right? Mm-hmm. That want a kind of virtual option. Sure. So I'm seeing more clients using that as kind of that first interim step, you know. Obviously, you're going to probably have to pay a little bit more. But then if you look at it, then you have that flexibility, because if you happen to have big swings in your, you know, the type of industry that you're in, that might work really, really well for you, right? And then you don't, you know, have all the other issues that you have to deal with. You don't want to have to hire and then fire people and all of that, you know. It's more of that contractual. So I see more and more people using that work, right?
I could see that working in the accounting world, because, you know, obviously the ups and downs. Super.
Well, this has been fabulous. I really love talking about this, you know, and I think we're going to think about, you know, kind of having, if we can have some like workshops and thoughts on this. And for those who've joined us, Mark doesn't know this, so I love putting people on the spot. We are going to have Mark on. Yeah, he doesn't know, right? He is kind of my guru, right? I mean, I like to connect. Now I'm a big connector, but Mark has got an art to connecting, and even at TIE, even in the board, we have lots of discussions, right? You know, even though we're going back to the real physical world, we still have this need to do virtual connecting, right? And doing it in the same way right, just doesn't really work, right? So how do we do this, connecting and networking and then having those levels of engagements in a different way? And Mark is very creative. So I will tell people, just kind of keep your eyes and ears out. He doesn't know this. I can see the surprise on his face. And we're going to figure out, how we frame this up and then have him come and talk to us about, effective networking, both in a digital marketing age and living in both a physical and virtual world.
And on that note, Yael, can you please share your LinkedIn in the chat so people can connect with you right now? That's quite useful. And anyone else who's in the chat that wants to share their LinkedIns as well. People just forget, like, being on these Zooms is sometimes like television. So we forget sometimes. So
For sure.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much to both of you. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Sam. And I think then we'll be posting this once we finished in, I believe, on YouTube. So thank you very much for joining us, and look forward to some more sessions talking about people.
Sounds
Thanks.
great.
Have a good evening. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.